Hello everyone, and welcome to this Energize Your Classroom series webinar organized by Language Cert. We will begin our webinar shortly, so let's give our registrants one more minute, if you like, one more minute to join. Please stand by. Thank you.
Hi, Hara from Greece. Buongiorno. Hi from Turkey. It's lovely to hear where you're from. Moldova. Wow, Peru and India. Wonderful. Thank you for being here. Sierra Jamelia, Minsk, Hungary. We have the world here today.
Well, I think we can start. Right, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Paul Bugnol, one of Language Cert's academic consultants. I am so pleased to be with you today, and it's also my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Indeed, we are fortunate to have with us once again Chantal Walsh, who will be speaking to us about mindfulness as a tool to manage exams. Chantal is a teacher and teacher trainer. She is also a Language Cert interlocutor for all levels. She is a graduate in Irish language and literature from University College Dublin, and also holds the higher diploma in education from Maynooth University, Ireland. Chantal has trained teachers for over 20 years in both primary and secondary state schools in Italy. She is particularly interested in mindfulness in the classroom and has given many talks on this area. She believes this is a fundamental tool in engaging all individuals in the learning process. So yes, today Chantal will be focusing on mindfulness as a tool to manage exams, a subject in which I'm sure we are all interested. Indeed, nowadays we often see students overwhelmed by stress and negative thoughts when it comes to assessment. So what can we teachers do to help them deal with exam stress? What can we best support? How can we best support students from an emotional point of view in the run-up to their exams? Are there any simple mindfulness techniques which students can practice to help them keep focus? Well, we'll see. Just a reminder before welcoming Chantal, please note that we'll take your questions throughout the webinar. Yes, we'll be taking your questions throughout the webinar today. So please feel free to type them in the chat box. And now, without further ado, let's start. Chantal, welcome. The floor is yours.
Okay, thanks for the lovely introduction, Paul. Good afternoon, everybody. As usual, thank you very, very much for being here. We always appreciate the fact that you're probably just finished school and running to be with us. It's very, very appreciated. And in particular, for me, for this topic on mindfulness, which is something that I believe in very strongly. And it's really such a pleasure to be able to talk about it and reflect on it with you today. As Paul mentioned, I've been teaching probably for about 25 years now. And I would say I've been examining students for about 20 of those years. And so this is a topic that's really very, very near to my heart as a teacher, but also as a mother with kids attending school. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm hoping today we can have a look at 6 different elements today. Okay, so starting with the caveman brain, talking about stress in exams, how mindfulness can help, understanding our mindsets, reframing, looking a bit at optimism and pessimism, and then also finishing looking at gratitude, because all of these things are very much intertwined when we talk about mindfulness. Okay, and so hopefully it'll all become clear as we go along. So just so that we're all sort of on the same page, I'd like to talk first of all about the brain and what's going on in our brain sometimes. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever been sleeping at night time, and maybe around 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, you wake up wide awake? Has this ever happened to you? Always. Sorry, Marilla. Okay, yes, a lot, often. Okay, so I see lots of people are sort of feeling that this can happen to them sometimes, often, always. And yeah, this is something that happens to many of us, and there are many reasons why we can wake up in the middle of the night. Sometimes it can be to do with our digestion. It can be related to hormones. It can be related to many reasons. But one of the reasons that we can wake up is also because our mind is buzzing. Our mind is full of thoughts, and we're maybe worrying about something, maybe thinking about something that we have to do the next day, or maybe reflecting on something that's happened during the day. Now, just to think for a little moment about sleep and how sleep works, without going into too much science here, we pretty much have sort of two hormones which are very important when we talk about sleep. One is melatonin, which actually helps us to fall asleep, helps us to doze off, and the other is cortisol, which helps us to get up. It's what we starts pumping in our bodies in the morning to get us up in the morning. But the interesting thing is cortisol is also the hormone which is released when we're under stress. Okay, and so this is just something to bear in mind. So the hormone that kind of wakes us up, keeps us awake, is also the same hormone which we release when we're stressed. Now, I want to kind of go back a little bit in time, let's say. Once upon a time, we had very different worries. We had very different problems and things to think about. The main thing we used to think about, I suppose, was survival. Thinking about living in the dark ages, the kinds of worries were maybe fierce animals, were the fact that, during the dark, you didn't know what to expect. And so the mind became very, I suppose, prepared to focus on these kinds of dangers. The brain was programmed to see negative things. And this is important because once upon a time, we needed the brain to do this to keep us safe, to help us survive in very dangerous times. And this is important to reflect on, that the brain is programmed to focus on danger. The problem is that we don't live in those exact times anymore, yet the brain hasn't really changed. And the mind is always looking for what's gone wrong, let's say. The mind is always trying to keep us safe, and is trying to focus on things that maybe have not gone well during the day, to try to find solutions to make sure that those things won't happen again. But what it can mean is that we can spend a huge amount of our time focusing on the negative things that have happened in the day rather than on the positive things. Okay, if I were to give you an example, I don't know what kind of a day you've had so far today. I hope it's been good. But imagine that today you had, I don't know, maybe 6 compliments, 6 people who said to you, you've done a great job, maybe in the classroom or at home. You get all of these, positive feedback, and maybe you get one insult, you get one bad negative comment. What's the one that's going to stay in your mind? Generally speaking, it's the negative, that this is the comment that when we go to bed, maybe tonight, that this is the one that will go over in our minds and say, well, why did I get that comment? What happened? And it's something that, we can drive ourselves crazy with focusing on these negative thoughts, because the brain will always find problems for us to focus on. And so we have to somehow be able to take a step back from this brain that sometimes becomes a washing machine. Because there are many studies that tells us that we spend a huge amount of our time focusing on negative problems. And if we go back to what we were saying before, when we're feeling sort of intense negative emotions, the attention focuses, and the attention focuses because the brain is trying to find a solution to whatever problem may have happened. And that's good in a certain sense if it's conscious. So imagine one of our lessons went very badly today, and we decide to say, okay, I want to reflect on this. I want to understand what went badly. How can I do better tomorrow? This is sort of conscious thinking. And this is very, very, very positive because we're reflecting on our teaching practice. But more often than not, it isn't really like that we're sort of constantly thinking about something negative, but unconsciously. And the problem with this is that it takes all of our attention. And so while we're focusing on the problem, we can kind of lose the bigger picture. We can kind of lose the context of the situation and completely lose perspective. They say that we can spend about 47% of our day in these kind of unconscious thoughts, sort of thinking about the past, worrying about the future. Do you think this is a kind of an accurate statistic? Are we on the same page here? Do you believe that we could spend about 47% of our day thinking negative thoughts? Unfortunately, yes. Yeah. Maybe more. This is the thing, maybe more. Has it ever happened to you maybe that you were driving to your school, and you arrive outside the school building and you kind of look around and think, oh, am I already here? And you don't know where the journey has got to. And so this is just to kind of, before we start thinking about, stress and exams, that we're kind of aware of how the brain works. So sometimes the brain is not always our friend, okay? Because the brain will bring us to this place of trying to focus on what's gone wrong instead of what's going right. Okay, so we're here to talk a little bit about stress and exams. And so thinking about how the brain works, if I were to ask you, why do you think students get stressed when it comes to exams? What do you think are the reasons that students get stressed? So Laura has written there because they're afraid of failure. Yeah, and I think we could probably put that fairly high up in the list because of fear. Maybe they're not well prepared, anxiety about evaluation, fear of the unknown. Yeah, there may be too focused on the result, lack of self-confidence, high expectations from parents. Maybe they've had traumatic events in childhood and bad experiences with exams in the past. They're lacking self-confidence, they're scared. Everything you're writing here. Absolutely. And so we can understand that this idea of students getting stressed it's also very, very normal. And because I think any of us coming up to an exam, you're going to feel a little bit nervous, and emotions are at the center of all human behavior. So this is something normal, let's say. The problem is, and I would say from my own experience, and I'm sure it's the same for you, having examined students over the years, that it's also heartbreaking when you see a student who clearly has studied very, very well, is prepared, and when it comes to that moment, they kind of can't manage their emotions and they can't perform how they would like to. And so just looking at some of the reasons, which are very similar to the ones that you mentioned here. So one of them is maybe they don't understand the purpose of the exam. So maybe they feel that, examiners are just going to focus on what they're not doing well because this is the way the brain works. Instead, it's important for students to understand that we're always trying to find, we want to reward students for their learning. And so we're trying to focus on what they are doing well. As you mentioned before, fear of failure, maybe peer pressure, they want to fit in with their friends. Expectations, maybe also unrealistic expectations from families, from teachers, their own personal expectations, pressure that they put on themselves. And sometimes it's also time management, that we can't classify all students as being the same. We know this. So some students are just better maybe at managing their time of preparing for the exams in time. Perhaps other students struggle and find themselves rushing at the last minute, which can cause stress as well. And then generally speaking, you know, we don't know what our students are going through. So they could have their own health challenges. They could have challenges with their own well-being, which is sort of creating more stress when it comes to this exam moment. Okay, but thinking about what stress does to the body, we know that when we get stressed, one of the first things that happens is our breathing pattern changes. So if you're feeling anxious or you're feeling stressed, you're not going to take deep breaths. You're going to take very shallow breaths. Your shoulders, you're not breathing from your diaphragm. And this kind of disrupts the balance of gases in the body. And this is a part of a stress reaction. Another thing that happens during a stress reaction is what we mentioned before, is that the body starts pumping cortisol, adrenaline. And this is all going back to how the body and the brain is programmed, that in a moment of danger, so if we think of like the response of fight or flight, in that moment of danger, the body has to be ready to run. And so the body has this stress reaction. It's preparing your body to escape maybe in a moment of danger. And the problem is this obviously creates this sort of hypertension in the body, which if it's needed in that moment, it serves a purpose is one thing. But if we're getting stressed for smaller things in life and we're getting stressed on a regular basis, this obviously has an impact on our health. And one of the important things to remember is that, unfortunately, the brain doesn't differentiate between what's happening live in that moment or what's a memory, what the brain is remembering. And so, for example, if we go back to what we were saying before, about maybe having a stressful moment during the day, perhaps at school, maybe you had a class where classroom management was very difficult today, and your brain, you know, in that moment, maybe you had a stress reaction. Later on, when you're reliving that moment, let's say, your brain thinks that it's still in that situation. And so the brain is having the same stress reaction as if you were actually there. And this is why they say stress is so bad for the body, because the body is not able for this type of hypertension. And so it's really something that we have to be aware of if students are getting very, very stressed coming up to exams. Okay, so with this, thinking about how the brain can kind of consume us a little bit sometimes with negative thoughts and so on, and the effect stress has on our body, then what I wanted to talk about today is the practice of mindfulness and how mindfulness could possibly help. Okay, so my first question is, what do you think of when you hear the word mindfulness? What comes to your mind? Sheila's asking if there's going to be a recording. Yes, we'll answer all of those questions after. There will be. So being in the here and now, Marilla, being conscious, meditation, awareness, all important words, all connected for sure. To be in the moment, looking after yourself, acceptance, maybe positive sentence to repeat, understanding, being present in the moment, self-confidence, being here now, eager to be holistic. Really lovely, lovely comments there. Here and now is coming out again and again. And it is that, honestly speaking, when I first, I suppose it's probably been about 10 years that I've been including mindfulness in my own teaching. So I'm in the classroom every day. So anything I'm sort of saying to you is coming from my own teaching experience. But I remember when I first started talking to people about 10 years ago about mindfulness, it was sort of a bit of a buzzword, and it wasn't really that clear what exactly mindfulness was. And so it's really lovely seeing so many people here today to, you know, explore a little bit more what mindfulness is, and that there's more of an interest around it. So mindfulness is definitely all of the things that you've just said, okay, right now. And I just want to kind of give one or two examples to you. So if I were to ask you, how many things have you done since you woke up this morning? So if you were to go back through your day from when the alarm started this morning, and hopefully the alarm didn't start too early. So the alarm starts ringing, maybe you had your breakfast, maybe you had your shower, maybe you had to drive kids to work, you got into the classroom, you've had your lessons, running. If it's like here in Ancona in Italy today, it's pouring rain, so that makes it more of a challenge. So I can imagine that you've done many, many things since you got up this morning. But sometimes we're doing all of these things and we're kind of going through the motions and not really living each moment, because this is also a kind of survival sometimes. But have you ever heard of this expression, to stop and smell the roses? If you hear that expression, to stop and smell the roses, what does that mean? So somebody wrote there that we're multitasking. Yes, we are. So if we stop and smell the roses, yeah, it's the idea of kind of that you pause, you feel, you're stopping, thinking, focusing on the little things, enjoying each moment. And it's literally that, instead of sort of racing through our day, having all of these thoughts, sort of like a washing machine going on, of sort of slowing down a little bit, but being a little bit more present in each moment that we're living. And this is a sort of explanation of mindfulness. Okay, I'm going to give you a visual as well now, which I think makes it very, very clear. Two people here, maybe going for a walk in the park. One person is actually there in the moment, looking at the lovely sunny day, looking at what's around them, breathing in the fresh air. And probably when that person has finished the walk in the park, they'll feel refreshed and maybe be able to go get on with the rest of the day. Instead, in the other case, the person is walking through the park, having the same experience, but they're not in the park. Their mind is still on the million things that they have to do when they finish the walk, or they're going back to things that have happened yesterday, the day before, 1 year ago, 2 years ago sometimes. And so they're going to finish the walk and they'll probably get to the end of the park and say, oh, okay, that's my walk done for today, but they haven't actually been there. And so mindfulness is how can we change this type of behavior? How can we kind of get out of our minds, out of our heads, and be in the present moment? Because what happens when we're sort of living life and our minds are consumed with all of these thoughts is that we kind of end up living a little bit on autopilot. And this has an effect on so many areas of our life, because sometimes it can happen where we're having a conversation with somebody and we're not really listening to the words that the person is saying, because maybe you're thinking of what you want to say next, or maybe you're still reliving a conversation that you had the last time that you spoke to the person. It can be the same thing when maybe we're eating our meals. We're not concentrating on the food, on the taste of what we're eating. We're just quickly eating the food to move on to the next thing. But at the end of the day, life is quite short, and we're maybe missing out on lovely, beautiful moments living in this way, living on autopilot. And so mindfulness is a way of trying to kind of get into the present moment and come out of our heads a little bit. And one of the ways of doing this is through breathing. And somebody mentioned before also meditation. And when you think of the idea of breathing, it can seem so ridiculous, really, because we take thousands of breaths every day. It's how we start our lives, through a breath. And yet we take these breaths for granted. And so when we find ourselves feeling stressed, feeling tense, I'm sure somebody has probably said to you at some stage in your life, just take a deep breath. And there is actually a logic to that, because by taking a deep breath, you're somehow focusing in on the breath in your body and coming out of your mind. Okay, so I'm going to take a deep breath now, because I've been talking a little bit for the last minute, and I'd be very happy if you want to join me of taking a deep breath in and taking a deep breath out. Now, through mindful practices, the idea is that you, for a period of time, maybe starting from a very short period of time, that you breathe. You breathe in and out, and you try to focus on the breath rather than focusing on everything that's going on in your mind. And I'll be honest with you, it's not that easy at the beginning. I remember when I first started practicing mindful breathing, I actually used to get quite frustrated. And I was like, well, this is not really the result I'm hoping for. Because it takes practice, because when you want to focus on your breath, your mind is going, but what about the shopping I have to do? And you try to bring your attention back, and your mind is going, but I have to correct an essay later, and you're trying to bring your attention back. But what we do know through studies is that over time, this type of practice really does make a big difference, and it changes the way your brain works, and it allows you to focus for longer and more important periods of time. So I want to look at an exercise with you now, and I don't know if you've seen this before, which is it's called the 333 rule against anxiety. And that is in a moment where somebody's feeling very, very overwhelmed, maybe panicking a little bit. So thinking of our students maybe before they're about to go into an exam situation. This is a little practice which can be very, very helpful. And there are 3 steps. The first one is, and I'd be very happy if you want to join me in doing this, is just right now to look around you, look around where you're sitting and name 3 things you see. So for example, I can say that I can see a clock, I can see a plant, I can see a lamp. And then we name 3 sounds that we can hear. So I can hear the computer whirring, I can hear the rain falling outside, and I can hear footsteps in the distance. And then the last is to move 3 parts of your body. So you can maybe move your fingers. Want to move your fingers with me? Move your wrists. And maybe you can move your ankles. And this is a very, very short practice, but whenever you feel your brain is going like 100 miles an hour, it's a kind of a mental trick to help center your mind. And it brings you back to the center, to the present moment, by focusing on what you can see, what you can hear, and moving 3 parts of your body. Okay, I'm just looking at the things that you can hear and see. Okay, sofa, office table, music. Okay, so mindfulness is something that, as we said, it's, maybe in the past was more of a buzzword, but it's certainly something that's been introduced into schools. It's part of the curriculum in Ireland and the UK. And it's something that I think more and more people are understanding and recognizing the problems that some young people face regarding their mental health, and that there have to be sort of moments where we can help students manage emotions, where we can help them manage the challenges that they have to face, that, we can't just teach content, but we have to also be able, for example, in this situation here of preparing students for the exam, that we prepare the content and we do all of that perfectly, but that we also bear in mind that there's an emotional aspect to sitting an exam, and that maybe there are things that we can help them to do in preparation for that. So thinking of mindfulness as a tool against anxiety. So this practicing breathing, trying to live in the present moment, trying to bring your focus to the here and now. Well, one of the first things is that this obviously helps you when it comes to exams to focus on the exam, to focus on the task at hand, rather than getting sort of overwhelmed with all of the future uncertainties, if you're able to bring your attention to the here and now. This practice of deep breathing immediately reduces stress. It improves focus and concentration. When we talk about emotional regulation, if we're more present, it means that we can kind of recognize when our minds are starting to run away on us, which allows us to sort of manage emotions in that moment. It allows us to maybe respond rather than just reacting to situations. There's a cultivation of self-compassion, because maybe we start becoming a bit kinder towards ourselves. Reduction of negative self-talk, which we're going to talk about in a moment, which is again just this awareness, which many of you wrote earlier on, this awareness of these negative thought patterns and where they can bring us. And then the last sort of to enhance clarity, this sort of mental clarity, by reducing these feelings of anxiety and feeling overwhelmed, it gives us a clearer mindset for exams. So there's really a lot to be said for this practice of mindfulness. So you might be saying, okay, this is wonderful, but how could I actually introduce mindfulness into my lessons? So today it's obviously sort of an introductory session to mindfulness. in, 45 minutes, an hour, I wouldn't be able to give it justice to go into all of the details of mindfulness, but I really hope that you'll be curious to know more after the session. But the first thing is you sort of developing your own belief of sort of thinking, okay, this is something maybe I don't know a lot about. I know something about it. I would like to know more about it, and finding out more to understand this is something I believe in, because if, obviously if you don't believe in it in yourself, then it's difficult to pass that on to students. Then creating a plan of action, kind of trying to get students on board. And this is something that maybe teachers might say, oh, well, I don't know about going into the class and starting to do breathing with my students. And what I would say there is that it could be interesting to maybe start with the science of talking about stress with students. Do they feel stress? When do they feel stress? Opening up that topic and listening to them, seeing what they say to you. And then maybe showing them the science of how, through breathing, through meditation, how it actually changes the brain and allows us to sort of regulate these stress reactions in our body. Then it could be introducing a mindful moment at the start of lessons. So sort of allowing students to arrive into the lesson, because they're running from one lesson to another, or when they're coming into our classrooms, we don't know what they're leaving in the morning at home. And so having a moment, which is something I do very often with my own students, where we start the day with one or two very, very deep breaths. And then we, ask how we're feeling, how we're all feeling that day. And then from there, getting into the lesson. And perhaps in the middle of the lesson, if you see students look tired, if you feel that they're kind of switching off, maybe getting them to stand up and taking a deep breath. I think one thing I would say is that not everybody feels comfortable closing their eyes. And so I wouldn't sort of insist on that. Often I just tell students just to look down if they don't want to close their eyes. But it's important that they kind of stay focused, because if they keep their eyes open, they're looking around, they're going to be maybe trying to make each other laugh or something. So it's important that they look down or they close their eyes. And then it's making it a habit, because the more often they do it, the more benefit obviously comes from it. And as a teacher, the more comfortable you'll feel leading them through it. And, there are lots of videos and things online that you can look to understand how teachers lead students through mindful moments. And I would say the last thing is just let go of expectations. So, maybe the first time you try to introduce breathing, or you try to talk about stress with your students, you might think, oh, it hasn't gone the way I wanted it to go. That's absolutely fine, because that's also part of mindfulness, is not to be too hard on ourselves. It's a case of starting and then, getting into a habit. Somebody's written there that they actually do this very often in their lessons, Antonella, almost every day. And sometimes it's the best part of my lesson. It is, and you'd be surprised how much students need it as well. Definitely. So I just want to move on for a moment to this idea of mindsets and reframing now. So we've spoken about the fact that sometimes we spend a huge amount of time in our minds with this sort of washing machine of thoughts that are going. So have you ever heard of these mindsets? I'm sure you have, of having a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. So I think the images here also help you to sort of grasp what they might be. So I'm just going to give you a definition here now. So a fixed mindset describes children, adults who believe their intelligence and their talents are fixed traits, so they can't grow. So they believe that you're kind of born with a certain level of ability or special skills, and you're not able to improve over time. Instead of growth mindset, you believe that, okay, you're starting here, but through dedication, through hard work, that you can improve and get better. And this is obviously fundamental in a language classroom, because, so few people are kind of born speaking English. This is something that is developed over time. And we need to sort of also understand our students, if they're approaching English, if they're approaching our lessons with a fixed mindset of thinking, I can't, I'll never be able to learn this language. Or if they're thinking, okay, it's not going great now, but with time, it will. it's interesting for you to kind of take a second maybe and say, actually, now that I think about it, maybe I do have some students who have a growth mindset that if I could think, they're not frightened to try, even if they know they're not going to get it perfectly right, they're not frightened of trying. Or other students who maybe shut down when, for example, maybe you start doing a listening task, they say, oh, I can't listen, I can't understand anything in English. And so they're kind of fighting themselves before they even begin. And so it's interesting for you to recognize, are there students like this that you have? Also recognizing yourself, because maybe sometimes we have a growth mindset for many, many things, a fixed mindset for something else. I know personally, I wasn't really fantastic at maths at school. And so when I know I'm in a situation, where maths comes up, I probably have a fixed mindset where I kind of shut down and say, ooh, this is not for me. Because related to this is, if I were to ask you, what do you think negative glasses are? I just happen to have a pair here. Okay, so at the moment now I'm wearing my negative glasses. What do you think has happened? Do you think I'm seeing as well as I was seeing a moment ago? And so somebody's writing a pessimistic view of life. Yeah, it kind of distorts your vision. If you're wearing negative glasses, you're not really seeing things the way they are, but as many of you are writing, you see them in a distorted way. And this is also a problem sometimes, because when you have these sort of negative glasses, sometimes it kind of gives you almost superpowers, because you feel that you can predict what's going to happen. So I know I'm going to say something stupid, everyone's going to laugh at me, I'll never be able to speak English. Or you think you know what everyone else is thinking. I don't think my teacher believes in me. Everyone thinks I sound strange when I speak English. And it's a kind of a negative self-talk, which is what we mentioned before. Maybe my friends are better than me. I'm not good at studying. Everyone else finds it easy. I'm the only one struggling. And we're sort of telling ourselves these messages. We're sort of reinforcing these messages in our brains, because our brains are always listening for the problems. And so this is something that's very important to watch out for with our students if they're talking to themselves in a very negative way and sort of telling themselves that they can't do things before they even begin. Part of this negative self-talk are these sort of unrealistic expectations. And again, here, there's so many studies that teens are experiencing increased anxiety because they're measuring themselves against unrealistic standards. So they're saying they can't do it because they're imagining that the students who can do it are here, and they're finding themselves somehow inferior to others. So my question is, in this situation, what can we do as teachers? Always bringing it back to the classroom. What can we do if our students are wrapped up in this negative self-talk? Well, one thing I certainly do with students very often is I show them this iceberg illusion. I don't know if you've seen it before. You may have. Where students understand that it's not really easy for anybody. So sometimes what we see is not representative of all of the effort, all of the hard work, all of the sacrifice that goes in. And certainly when I start courses with students, very often we look at this together to talk about expectations, that as much as I would love to, I don't have a magic wand. I can do my part as a teacher, but students have to do their part as well. And the other thing is, that they understand that learning a language, they will make mistakes. If they already spoke English perfectly, they wouldn't need to be in an English class with me. So it's okay to make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. Through making mistakes, the brain actually grows. We know that in the brain, if everything stays the same, nothing happens. When we make mistakes, remember, the brain is immediately trying to find out what went wrong. And so the motor neurons start firing, and we try to understand, why did I make the mistake? What went wrong there? And so something happens. And so this is actually, the brain is growing when they make mistakes. And I love this quotation from Michael Jordan, which is, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that's where I succeed. And I think it's very important for students to hear quotations like that and hear stories like that. But no, it's never easy for anybody the first time. The first time we do anything, it's not going to probably be a success. It takes time. And then another part related to that is that sometimes as teachers then, because we want to build our students up and we want to make sure they have lots of confidence, is that sometimes we can end up finding ourselves falling into the trap of saying, great, well done, you're doing really well. And we say these things from a really good place because we're trying to build up our students. But very interestingly, sometimes this can actually develop a fixed mindset, which might sound strange, because sometimes if students are just sort of praised for the result rather than the process, it can kind of push them into a comfort zone where they can be frightened to try because they think, well, I did that really well, so it's better I don't kind of risk doing anything else, because if I keep doing that, I'm going to stay at that level, that view that my teacher or my parent has of me. And so what's much more important is trying to praise the process of recognizing the hard work that has been put in, the determination, and the progress from maybe one test to another, the effort. And this is something that's much more useful rather than these sort of words like great, well done, and so on. And related to that is this fact that sometimes also students don't really recognize what they're doing well. And sometimes, they will say to us, but am I improving? Am I getting better? And this is where we have to kind of make the learning visible so they understand, well, you were here and you're getting there. Look at all the effort. So maybe you're not at the level you want to be just yet, but there's time. Because sometimes we don't recognize our own strengths. Again, going back to our negative brains, if somebody said, what are all of your flaws, or what are all the things that you have to improve, we probably have a long list of things to share. Instead, if we actually focus on the positive things, and somebody else can help us also in identifying the positive things, that your persistence, you never give up, you have so much determination. For you, it could be innate, but when somebody else says it to you, you recognize, oh, actually, that is a strength, and that is something that I can kind of bring to the table as well. Okay, so I want to just have a little reflection with you now on this idea of optimism and pessimism. And sometimes when we hear these words, optimism and pessimism, especially optimism, people can, kind of assume that means we just have to have a big smile on our face all day long. And it certainly isn't that. Because I think if we're talking about mental health, I think that can actually be quite detrimental to mental health, to pretend everything is fine when it isn't. When I'm talking now about optimism and pessimism, I want to talk more about how we react to things that happen in our lives. Okay, so we've said before about this idea of the brain is always moving, the brain is always thinking. And I know this quotation, I think it's a brilliant quotation, to be honest, is that thoughts have power. And if we look at this video of the brain in action here, thoughts really do have power, they're energy, and you can make your world or break your world by your own thinking. And so we have a responsibility to ourselves as well of how we're going to view things that are going to happen to us. And so getting back to this optimism and pessimism, we can kind of fall on a kind of a spectrum. But how we kind of explain things that happen to us can put us in sort of a more optimistic frame of mind or a more pessimistic frame of mind. So we were talking before about all of this sort of mental chatter that's going on in our brains. So when something happens to us, this mental chatter can kind of go in different directions. So sometimes we can think that an event is temporary, it's just a one-off, or it's permanent, it's going to last forever. Or maybe we can think it's something local, so it's just that situation, or it's global, it's going to affect everything in our lives. We can think of something being personal, that we're the cause of the event, or something impersonal, that the event has nothing to do with us. And this is from a wonderful book, which is called Wellbeing in the Primary Classroom. And even if you don't work in primary, it's a really, really great read, where, the writer, Adrian Bethune, talks a lot about optimism and pessimism. And one of the things he does is he tries to break down these explanatory styles. And I thought this was very clear and very, very useful. So if you imagine a negative event happens in your life, okay, so thinking of a student, so we're talking about exams, a student failed fails an exam, which can happen. So there are going to be different ways of explaining and talking to ourselves after this event. So the optimist might believe, well, this is temporary, it's not going to last forever. Okay, it's local. This isn't great, but if I put it in perspective, other things are going well. Impersonal, I tried my best. Maybe it was out of control. Maybe it was more difficult than I thought it was going to be. The pessimist might think, okay, it's always going to be like this, no matter what I try. This means everything is ruined now. So it becomes sort of global. So we're completely losing perspective. Or personal, this is all my fault. So you're kind of taking all the responsibility onto yourself. And this is if a negative event happens. If a positive event happens, you'll notice that it kind of switches. So now the optimist is thinking that, well, maybe it's permanent. So if I keep doing this, actually, I can expect more positive outcomes. They might think in a more global way, well, maybe this will affect other areas of my life too. And also they own it and say, well, I worked really hard, so I made this happen, which is great for your self-esteem. The pessimist, on the other hand, might think, well, this is not going to last forever. Or just because this went well, it doesn't mean everything else will. Or I got lucky this time, didn't really have anything to do with me. And so kind of not owning their success. And I think this is very, very interesting to look at the kind of thoughts and what we're telling ourselves when it comes to this optimism and pessimism. And one of the things which can be helpful in managing this kind of optimism, pessimism, and it takes practice, like mindfulness, like everything else, is the ABC model, which is, I think, very positive in the fact that our levels of optimism can be trained like other skills. I think that's a very positive message to hear, that we can kind of teach ourselves to get better at recognizing unhelpful thinking strategies and trying to replace them with positive ones. And so this is the idea of awareness, where you see your mind is starting to kind of go down this sort of dark tunnel of sort of catching it. Okay, so for example, ABC, so we have an adversity like failing an exam. This can very quickly go into a belief, I'm terrible at English. And then the consequences, okay, that's it. I'm not going to try with English anymore anyway, because I'm hopeless. And so trying to catch the thought before it escalates, because when it escalates, it can completely deplete us. So trying to catch it, challenge it, and choose a more helpful response. And as I said, this takes practice, but it's something that can be quite life-changing, because as we said before, our thoughts can make or break us. I think language, and we're all language teachers here, is also something very, very interesting. That sometimes we really identify with the feelings that we have. So for in English, we say sort of, I am sad, I'm tired, I'm lonely, I'm happy. I live in Italy, so I know in Italian, we all say sono triste, sono stanca, sono solo, felice. And we kind of tell ourselves, I am, identifying that this is who I am. And as Paul mentioned before, I'm from Ireland, and in Irish, in the second language that we speak in Irish, there's a different approach when you talk about language, where you say to bron to tir where you say that a feeling is on you like a hat. And the idea is not this is you and this is who you're always going to be, but a feeling is on you and that it's going to kind of move. So right now you're feeling like this, but it's not going to last forever. And this is a really important perspective, because one reason that these sort of big feelings can feel so uncomfortable for small children, and not just small children, to be honest, with adults too, is that you don't view maybe the emotions as temporary. You don't think, okay, this is a really bad day, I'm having a bad day, but it's just now. It's not going to be always like this. Because being able to tell ourselves it's not always going to be like this helps change the perspective and gives us hope. And so this idea of language is quite interesting as well, of what we say to ourselves. And so it's kind of like the weather. And this is another mindful activity, which I do very often with primary students, of kind of asking them how they're feeling. And not everybody feels comfortable saying the adjectives or how they're feeling. And so it can be nice with younger children to say, well, what's the weather inside you? Are you feeling sunny? Are you feeling rainy? Are you feeling cloudy? And so on. And then understanding that these feelings are like weather. So it's not always going to be like that. They're not permanent, that they're moving. And that helps to take away this feeling of being completely overwhelmed. Okay, I hope you're with me so far. And so this is sort of an idea of sort of reframing. There's always a different way of seeing a situation. And it's acknowledging there's a different perspective to view negative events from. So somebody wants the boat, somebody else wants the land. And I'll be very honest with you. I'll give you my own example. For me, when I have to speak in front of people, I enjoy it very, very much. Because it's lovely sharing with other teachers, and sometimes we don't have enough opportunities to share. But I must admit, I get very nervous, and I get very nervous because I care very much. I care very much about teaching, and I care very much that you're giving up your time to be with me. And so I get very nervous. And I remember reading something and it said about reframing. When you get very nervous about something, you should tell yourself, instead of telling yourself, oh, I'm so nervous. Oh, I'm so nervous. And kind of reinforcing that thought, that you could say to yourself, I'm excited about this. And I remember the first time I read it, I laughed out loud. I just thought, oh, how ridiculous. But I can be honest with you, I actually started practicing doing it, and it really helped me. So I can tell you, even today, before meeting you, I was telling myself, I'm excited about this. I'm excited about this. And somehow you're feeding yourself positive thoughts rather than maybe negative thoughts. Okay. And then I just want to finish. As I said, I know there's lots of information. There's so many things that we could say, that we could talk about and reflect on together, but we'd be here all evening, and you're already giving up a lot of your precious time. But one of the things that can definitely help us when we're feeling stressed, when we're feeling overwhelmed, is gratitude. Because when we're focusing on the negatives and we're complaining, it's just the opposite of being thankful for what we have. And so one of the things definitely that I do very often in the classroom with students is focusing on what they've learned in a lesson, or what has gone well in a lesson. And this is something, you know, one, to recognize how much they're learning in English. So what, you know, finishing a lesson, maybe saying, so what are the things that we've learned today? Focusing on the positive things of what has been learned rather than what has been difficult. And then also focusing maybe on good things that have happened that day, that week, that month, and especially getting them to explore why these things happened, because it's easy to write down something good that happened, but kind of saying, but why did that happen? Because maybe it's linked to the mindset. Maybe it's linked to, in that moment, I was actually feeling really good, and so I made a new friend, or something like that. And it can definitely reduce anxiety by focusing on the positives. And again, here there are many, many studies that says, you know, practicing gratitude reduces the level of cortisol. And we said at the beginning, cortisol is what keeps us awake at night. It's the stress hormone, and that can be reduced by 20%. And it boosts happiness, because, as we said before, if we're focusing on what we're thankful for, and there's always something to be thankful for, then, you know, it's putting us into a different perspective of kind of keeping our minds open rather than closing them and just focusing in on that, like that flashlight, on what's not going well. And I'd like to, we're almost near the end, I'd like to share a video with you. And I don't know if you've come across this video before, but I think it's a very touching video. It's very nice. And it's about gratitude, about maybe things that we take for granted. Okay, so let me just check that you can hear it. Okay.
I didn't really know there was such thing as colorblindness at the time. I think I was 6 or 7. I thought maybe I wasn't intelligent enough to tell, because I didn't know, and I didn't tell my parents, so I stopped painting and drawing.
There's some drawings where I wish I could see how my kids put the colors together and what they were visualizing. It's not that I can't name them, there's nothing there. That's gray, and that's gray, and that's gray.
I had moments where girls would make fun of me for not knowing girly shades, and I felt self-conscious about it.
Sometimes I feel like there is a world of color that I'm just sort of missing out on.
Color blindness is a situation where, because your eyes are different than someone else's eyes, you don't see the world the same way. Commonly, red and green don't look different, but look the same. So if there's a kind of a color filter, a kind of glasses that would separate colors, they suddenly can see red and green.
There's nothing wrong with the wiring. The problem exists in the eye with the photopigments. So Valspar is working with us at Enchroma to bring color to everyone. We developed these glasses to enable colorblind people to see color for the first time in their lives.
Wow. Oh, look at that.
There's like this whole end of the spectrum that I just was completely not aware of. I'm like getting misty. This is amazing.
I've never been able to see this one. And I just want to cry a little bit. I never realized like how much I was affected by the fact that I can't see the world like the way that other people see the world.
When he's drawing, I see him going in and out of his crayon box like 150 times sometimes. Oh wow, that's cool. And now I kind of know why. There's a lot more colors here. All these things that are intentional in life, I never caught on to it.
In the end, the experience of color is so private that you don't really know how to explain that.
So is that what you guys see every day? Yeah? Yeah, just everything's flatter. Everything's, yeah, kind of, yeah. I don't want to take them off.
It's just dull. It's a little dull, to be honest. I never really thought about my color blindness that much. It was just something that I had, that I dealt with, and that wasn't really a big deal to me. But color is an amazing experience that I think people probably take for granted.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that little video. I thought it's very interesting, the part where the man says, when he looks at the sunset, he says, "Is that what you see every day?" You know, we probably take it for granted, and we probably do. So just to sum up a little bit, so we've looked, as you said, a very quick overview of mindfulness, but I hope it's something, if you found it interesting, that you'll be able to maybe discover a little bit more about it. So we spoke about the caveman brain, about how our brain doesn't always help us. We spoke about stress in exams, of why students get stressed. So us understanding why is already very important. How mindfulness can help. Understanding our mindsets and reframing, because it's all connected. Optimism, pessimism, choosing to see situations in a different way, helping our students to see things in a different way, and practicing gratitude. So recognizing what is going well, what we can be thankful for. And I just want to finish with this last quotation, which always makes me laugh, is worrying is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere. So easier said than done. We all worry, but at the end of the day, it's not really helping us. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for a second so I can see. I see you writing in the chat box. Oh, thank you for your lovely comments. You're very sweet. It's always a pleasure, and as I said, mindfulness is very, very close to my heart. So if it's made you anyway curious, I'm really pleased. And then Paul, I don't know, do you want to join us? Do you want to join us again? Is it possible to see it again? I think so. I think
Yes.
it's been recorded. Paul knows all the logistics better than I do.
Lots of nice messages. Congratulations, Chantel, actually.
Oh,
Is there any question you would like to answer now, although although
some of the questions I was sort of answering as I was going along. I have a question. Yeah, if you want to write, if there's any questions that you would like to write, I'm more than happy to answer. Yeah, the video is very touching. It is, and I think sometimes we need a little reminder. As we said, we get so caught up in our daily lives, we forget all the beautiful things around us. Okay. I'm not sure there are any questions, Paul.
no questions. Well, I think we are all touched. We are all touched, really. So, Chantel, we would like to thank you for your most interesting and inspiring and touching presentation. And I'm sure that you have shared with us quite a few practices that can easily fit into the classroom and help our learners, manage their emotions, not only at school, not only when taking exams, but also in their everyday life. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
So a very, very big and sincere thank you, Chantel. And to our attendees now, well, on behalf of our Language Cert team, thank you for your time. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your questions and comments. And remember that we're looking forward to seeing you soon. And yes, remember there are quite a few webinars planned for the next weeks or so. Actually, the next Energize Your Classroom webinar is in about 3 weeks' time for you to know. So feel free to register. And last but not least, as always, remember there is a short evaluation survey, all right, that will pop up on your screen all of a sudden. Remember that we always value your feedback. So a very big thank you to Chantel, to all of you, and looking forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you, and bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye. Have a nice evening. Thanks, Paul. Bye-bye.